So I don't think that STOs are going to replace ICOs. I think they're going to complement ICOs. I think that ICOs are useful when the underlying token has utility. So certain kinds of applications, it makes sense to issue a token that works inside of an application ecosystem. But I think that a much bigger source of funding is going to happen from security token offerings, just because there's more value in the equity of businesses than I think there will be in native tokens for applications. And I think that STOs are ultimately going to become the dominant form of digital asset creation in the world. I think there are certain challenges to making that happen, regulatory challenges, for example, but those are things I think that will be overcome with time. Well, I think, yeah. So I think the blockchain can help in a couple of ways. The most obvious one is to enable, for the first time ever, real, proper online voting. So online voting is an idea that has been floated before, but has been met with some skepticism for good reason, because the internet is not a good medium for votes. When you move something on the internet, you're not moving a unique thing, you're moving a version. Now that's good for certain kinds of information, but it's not good for assets, which is why Bitcoin, for example, is so revolutionary, is because it enabled digital scarcity of an asset. And I think the same principle can apply to votes as well. And if you look at the data, it suggests that most of the people who don't vote are young people or new immigrants or minorities, and oftentimes that's because they actually don't have the ability to get off work to go to polling stations to vote. And so if you can enable them to vote from their devices in a secure and transparent way, then that would improve the participation in elections, which would in turn improve the legitimacy of the outcome. And that's a way it could help democracy. I think the blockchain industry in Korea is amazing for a lot of reasons. There are lots of entrepreneurs who are building businesses. There are lots of people in Korea who are aware of this technology and who use it and who own assets. And there are lots of big companies that are showing a willingness to innovate where they wouldn't maybe in other parts of the world. And that's not just that they're paying lip service to innovation, they're actually doing it. They're hiring developers, they're building use cases. So I look at that and I think, funding, entrepreneurship awareness, and corporate activity is all pretty good. It's higher probably in Korea than it is in a lot of parts of the world, which makes me very optimistic. And right now, I think of Seoul as a top 10 city in the world for blockchain innovation, and I think it has the opportunity to move higher on the list. So the new edition of the book was released in June of this year, 2018. So about 2 years after the first edition. And the world's changed a lot in that 2-year period of time. And so we wanted the new edition to reflect that. So the new edition includes 2 new chapters, over 25,000 words of new material, and it addresses a lot of topics that were lightly covered in the first edition because the industry was still mature. So, for example, we never talked about ICOs, we never talked about security tokens, we never talked about non-fungible tokens, crypto collectibles. We never talked about crypto fiat currencies or stable coins. All of these concepts were not really in the first edition of the book, mostly because those things didn't really exist at the time. And so we felt the need to include it. We also talked a lot more about smart contracts, the deployment of smart contracts across applications. And we spoke a lot about the challenges of governments and regulating, and we talked about enterprise adoption and uses of the technology. All of those things they were captured in the first edition of the book, but they weren't fully fleshed out for the simple reason that the industry was still earlier stage. Well, I look at cryptocurrency as one use case of blockchain. I think that crypto assets, more generally, encapsulate lots of different use cases. So I think when it comes to cryptocurrencies, the challenges are usability, functionality. I think it's important that, I think Bitcoin has proven itself to be very useful for lots of people, but I think other crypto assets still have a lot to prove. And when it comes to underlying blockchain technology, I think that the real problem or the real challenge is usability and scalability. The ability, for this technology to be useful, it needs to work, and it needs to work at scale. And things have changed a lot since the first edition of the book came out, and we've seen the creation of whole new technology platforms, which are very useful, but there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. So if you were to ask me, to write a third edition of the book, which I won't, but if I were, I would hope that in 2 years' time those problems had been addressed and overcome. No, I think there are lots of use cases. It's not so much use cases as it is usability. There are lots of use cases for blockchain, but there aren't as many applications that are being widely used, and that's the difference. So there's one thing to say there's lots of theoretical value, and there's another to say that it's being deployed in practice. So what I think needs to happen is we need to take what's demonstrable and apparent, which is that this technology can change lots of things and do lots of things, and actually make it applicable for individuals and for businesses. And I think certain blockchain use cases have already done that. I think Bitcoin has already done that. And I think that ICOs is another example. We just need to see more of that happen. Well, I think there are two separate issues. So issue number one is that cryptocurrency exchanges get hacked. And as they get hacked, right? And people who have their assets in custody, their private keys on exchanges, means they lose their money. And that's a big problem. So I think that people need to take more agency over their assets. I think they should not rely on exchanges as much. But I also think the exchanges themselves need to get a lot better. They need to put in place procedures and controls and backups and other solutions to ensure they don't get hacked as much. That's different from fraud. Fraud to me is when someone does something deceitful in order to create some economic gain. And I think more about fraudulent ICOs in that regard. So there are lots of ICOs, unfortunately, that have happened that are just frauds. And that's a big problem. And that's why there's a need for regulation. I don't think it's enough to say, buyer beware, and then that'd be the end of it. I think that governments and regulators need to ensure that projects that raise money this way are being transparent, that they're being open, and that investors understand what they're buying. Because if they're not, then it's going to cause people to sour on this, which I think has already occurred to a certain degree. And as a result, it's going to prevent the growth of the industry. And so we need to overcome these issues. So it's a combination of things, right? It's a combination of companies doing better. It's a combination of individuals taking more control. And it's also a combination of governments and regulators, providing some level of oversight and some level of, rulemaking in order to ensure it grows responsibly. Sure. So the Blockchain Research Institute is the largest independent think tank in the world dedicated to blockchain. So we are conducting the definitive investigation into blockchain use cases, opportunities, and challenges. And we're focused on use cases and opportunities for big companies and for governments. So our membership includes some of the biggest companies in the world, companies like FedEx and Exxon and IBM and Microsoft and Pepsi and Tencent and Fujitsu and Reliance Industries. So really a global mix of companies across a diverse set of industries. And we are conducting research into, basically all of the ways in which they can use blockchain to transform the way they do business today and open up new markets in the future. And that takes many forms. We produce world-class research. We've got a great faculty. We host events. We have an education platform that we are launching. And we're planning on holding the biggest enterprise blockchain conference in the world in Toronto in April of next year. We have a couple of companies. We have Icon, which is a Korean blockchain platform. They're a member of the Blockchain Research Institute. And one of the reasons that I'm in Korea is to meet with a bunch of companies and governments who've shown an interest in joining. So hopefully soon I'll be able to announce some new Korean members of the BRI.